Hey guys, I'm Sun. I'm a privacy and security researcher, and you're watching The Privacy Guides. A few episodes back, I mentioned why I didn't like using Dropbox or Drive for backups. Some of you have asked in the comments, well, if I'm using an app that encrypts the data and then stores it on Drive or Dropbox, is that okay? Well, it really depends if you're installing the Drive or Dropbox app on your computer, because if you are, well, essentially they have access to the full file system. So given the app would be compromised, well, they have access to the data unencrypted. That's why if you are using Dropbox or Drive, I recommend uploading the files using the web browser, which essentially makes it unpractical. And that is why in today's episode, I'm going to suggest using an app called Borg. Borg is an open source project that is used to do deduplication and backup encrypted data to the cloud. And there are a whole bunch of backends for Borg, and I'll discuss them in a second. But before we get there, I want to take a moment to share how excited I am that the Privacy Guides project and community has been growing over the past few months. The channel is probably going to go over 6,000 subscribers within the next few days. And that really blows my mind. So I guess some of you are sharing that with your families, with your communities. And that is super helpful. Together, we're really shedding light on why privacy matters. So I wanted to take a moment to say thanks. Thanks for that. I would also like to take a moment to say thanks to everyone who has starred the Privacy Guides repository. Without going into detail, all of the reference material is published on sunknutson.com, but it is also, and actually its source is published on GitHub in an open source fashion so that it can be peer reviewed. All of those stars really help create awareness for the project and add credibility to it. So thanks to everyone who has done that. So let's jump back into Borg. I'm not sure if you guys have watched the episode a few episodes back. I'll link it in the description. But I had created an episode on how to use rsync and Veracrypt to create encrypted backups. And that's a really cool way of doing backups. But there is one problem with this approach, and that is that all versions are stored entirely. What I mean here is, say we have a file that's 50 megabytes, and we add data to that file, and now it's 60 megabytes. Well, the 60 megabytes will be stored entirely if we're using the rsync approach. If we're using an approach that uses deduplication, and that's kind of how Git works for the developers out there, well, only the 10 megabytes delta will be backed up or stored to the cloud. That means that the full data set will now be 50 plus 10, so 60. Instead of having 50 plus 60, which is 110. So not only is this really great when we're backing things up on the cloud and we have limited space, but it's also really efficient from a bandwidth perspective because we're not going to be uploading the full 50 or 60 megabyte file. We're only going to be uploading 10 megabytes, which is really, really more efficient. So Borg Backup is an open source project. It's a deduplicating archiver with compression and encryption. So it's essentially an app that runs using command line on the computer, and then that app is able to take a whole bunch of source files or folders and back them up or archive them, making sure that they're compressed and encrypted when configured that way before leaving the computer. So that means that the data is encrypted on the computer. So whatever destination you may choose, that destination, the people that are operating that destination cannot see the data. And that's very, very important. And that's the main difference between using Borg versus using Dropbox or Drive. Now, Borg is also very active as an open source project. It's extremely peer reviewed and adored by the community. And myself, I've switched to Borg recently and I couldn't be happier. It's extremely efficient at making backups. Now, Borg works in a very specific way. It needs a server in the cloud that has an SSH compliant file system. That's probably not the right way of phrasing it, but I mean, essentially, it will not work with Amazon S3 or other types of block storage. You need to have access to a remote file system using SSH. That means that having your own virtual private server or VPS is great. But thankfully, there are more user-friendly ways for people that are not as deep into technology. And one of those is called Borg Base. Borg Base is a cloud-based hosting provider especially designed for Borg backups. And the people behind Borg Base actually developed a client, called Vorta. Ooh, sorry about that. Jesus. Called Vorta, and that makes it much easier for people that are not used to command line to actually set things up. And that's going to be the subject of today's episode. Now, before I get my hands dirty and show you guys how to do this, I want to mention that some of you said in the comments that some episodes I'm not going fast enough, and other people said, "Son, you're going way too fast. We're not able to follow." I wanted to say that I really empathize with both people, both opposites of that spectrum. I know some of you are very technical and that might be kind of boring, and I know some of you are not technical at all and you want to learn, so when I go too fast, So what I'm trying in the context of Borg is I'll be publishing 4 episodes, all one level deeper into the rabbit hole, all the way to using a Raspberry Pi to self-host on our own hardware a Borg server. So we'll be going from using Vorta, which is super user-friendly, to self-hosting on our own hardware. And what's really cool actually of doing this on a Raspberry Pi is you can actually take that and send it by mail to a friend in another country, and you can set up your own offshore backups, which is really exciting. So we're gonna get there, stay tuned, but let's jump in today's episode. So today's episode is about using Vorta. That's for the uninitiated, the people that are just getting started. So the first thing we wanna do is install that. So if we click, and I'll link all of this stuff in the description, so the links will be there for you guys. If we click on install, it asks us which operating system, so we're on a Mac, and then it recommends installing this via Homebrew. I've talked about Homebrew in a whole bunch of other episodes, but today it's for the uninitiated, so we're gonna do things the old-fashioned way, it's not even a bad way, by the way, but anyways, that's a lot of ways. Woo! Okay, we want to click on releases. That's going to bring us to the GitHub page, which is here. And we want to download the latest released as a DMG file. That's something that you guys are familiar with by now. So yeah, let's do this. So we're going to download this to our computer. Now, I think I had, I'm kind of stupid. I already had it here. Okay, boom. So we're going to click that open, and as you guys know by now, you just take this and you drag it into the application folder. And once this is done, we essentially want to pop open Vorta, so you can use Spotlight, type Vorta, and boom. Once this is done, it says Vorta is an app downloaded from the internet. Are you sure you want to open it? Yes, we just downloaded from the official repository, so that's cool. Okay, so this is what we're brought into the first time we open Vorta. So there's a whole bunch of things going on here, but before we move forward here, I want to mention that you guys will be using, in the context of today's episode, Borg Base as the cloud provider. Now, why Borg Base? Borg Base, they're actually the people behind Vorta. Vorta is probably the most used, or perhaps even only, desktop client that runs on Mac. And so they're very involved in the open source project. Manu is actually the lead of this open source project, and he's also the CEO of Borg Base. And the really cool thing with Borg Base for people that are on a tighter budget is they offer 10 gigabytes for free forever. I'm really not sure how Manu can afford to do that, but that's pretty cool. So for the time it lasts, you guys can jump onto that offering. And pricing is actually very competitive even after that. So if you guys have like 100 gigabytes account, it's $24 per year. If you can afford paying for this stuff, please do. People who are involved in open source can really use a hand. But for today, we're going to just set up a trial account, and that's what I did. And I'm logged in now. So when we get into Borg Base, the first thing that we want to do is go about creating a repository. And that will ask us for an SSH key. without getting super overkill technical, SSH keys are a set of keys, both a public key and a private key, that are used to connect to servers over SSH. So we need to create one of those key pairs on our computer and share our public key with Borg base. So if we go back to Vorta, they made that really easy. If we click on SSH key, we can go about creating a new key here. And once we create a new key, we're going to call this Borg base and generate it and copy it to the clipboard. Once this is done, we can click on add key and paste that here. Okay. And then set, click on add key. Then we need to set a repository name. We're going to call that backup. And then we're going to choose that key we just created as the key that has full access. There's a concept in Borg backup called append-only access. I'll discuss this in future episodes. Today, we're keeping things as simple as possible, yet secure. Then you want to choose the region that suits you. So if you're within Europe or close to Europe, that's the one. If you're in US, US is the one. I'm using a VPN that terminates in Iceland, so setting that to Europe is actually the best for me. Once this is done, you just click add repository, and this is what happens. We can then go about copying the repository and pasting that here. So when we go into repository, we can initiate a new repository and we can paste that URL, and then we need to set a passphrase. I'm just going to write pretty much, you want something that is long, you want something that is at least 24 to 28 characters long. That doesn't include words from the dictionary, and that will be saved to the keychain. So it's not something you need to memorize, but you do need to make sure that you back up keychain, and that was actually the subject of that episode on how to set up the backups using rsync and Veracrypt. Not sure if I mentioned this in this take, by the way, but yeah. Okay, so once this is done, we can go in advance and we can say to Vorta to use our Borg base. Actually, this is from another practice run. Sorry about that. That shouldn't be there. So Borg base. Now, repo key Blake 2, that means that the encryption key will be actually stored, well, the encryption file, which is a key, will be stored as part of the repository and will be encrypted with that passphrase. There are more secure ways, in my opinion, of doing that, but that will be the subject of another episode that I just mentioned. There's a series of 4, so we'll get there. But this is very secure for people that are getting started. So we can click add. All right, so now it's going to go about setting up the repo. As you saw probably in the last episode on Little Snitch, I now have Little Snitch, so I need to tell Little Snitch to allow my computer to connect to Borg Basis cloud. So allow, and then it's doing its little shenanigans, and boom. Okay, so now it's done. Next thing, we want to choose our key here. Again, append only, that shouldn't be there. That was from a practice run. For compression, we're going to be using the LZ4. That's a really, really efficient way of compressing data, but it's also not the most efficient way to reduce file size, but we don't want to take too much CPU because that makes our computer slow and stuff, so that's not cool. Next up, we need to set sources. So to keep things really simple in the context of today's episode, I'm just going to add my user. Okay, so that's actually interesting. I'm glad it's asking us this. So macOS Catalina, perhaps the version before, and definitely Big Sur, will ask us if we want to allow this app to have access to our documents folder. Yes, we do, because we trust the app. And then it wants to have access to the desktop. Okay, fair enough. Once this is done, I'm going to go in Documents, and I'm trying to figure this out. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I'll use Documents. There's not much in it. There's only one file, so it's kind of not the best example, but yeah, we'll add stuff to it, and I'll show you how this stuff is then, appended to the backup. So we'll open this. So essentially, I'm backing up everything that's in the Documents folder here, and then if we go into Schedule, we want to set up backups. I mean, that's up to you. That's up to your preference, but I like setting them up every hour and have it validate the repository every 4 weeks, that means that it's going to check that, data is not corrupted on the backup. Then in archives, that's where we're going to see the different archives that we have. There are none yet. An archive, by the way, is like a full backup done to the repository, which is essentially a folder in the cloud where backups are stored. In MISC, we're going to say that we want to see notifications for successful backup tasks, just as we're getting initiated to Borg, and we want Vorta to start at login. Okay, all of this being done, we can go about setting up our first backup, and we just have to click start for this. Now, given we have very little in that folder, that should be very fast. And by the way, subsequent backups will be very fast because only the delta will be uploaded, which makes things very efficient. So the backup is finished. If we go into archives, we'll see that we now have one archive, and that's pretty cool. So let's start by adding something to that documents folder. So I'm going to go into, do I have something in here? No, I don't have something in here. Give me a second. Okay. So I'm going to go into my T5. This is my vlog. This is actually where I archive all of the different episodes. And we're going to go in one of the last ones here that I have backed up. And I'm just going to take, a file. How large is this? 4 gigabytes. That's intense. Okay, so let's say I'm going to, trying to see. Okay, so we'll take a bunch of different thumbnails here. And I'll just drag them to, drag them to documents. And once this is done, let's run another backup. So if we start the backup here, what's going to happen is it is going to check what has changed. And in this context, we now have a few thumbnails. And as we can see here, it is uploading those thumbnails. So it's not uploading them, actually. It's compressing them, encrypting them, and then chunking them and uploading them to the repository. Once it's done, if we go into archives, we're going to see that we now have two archives, one that's very small and one that is a little bigger. So what if we deleted a file from our computer and we want to restore that file? That's the whole purpose of having backups. The one reason why I do like cloud backups is if ever our house catches fire or something tragic like that, well, we have the data outside of our homes. And that's actually something that makes our data very resilient. But okay, so in order to mount archives, which is the way that I favor, it allows us to kind of navigate through the files, we need to install Fuse. So that's something that we actually did in the context of the episode on rsync and veracrypt. So to do that, we just click on that link, and then we want to go and download Fuse for macOS. Now we can save that to the file system. All right, and then we can go about opening Fuse and double click on Fuse for macOS. Okay, so this package will run a program to determine if the software can be installed. Yes, go ahead, continue, agree. By the way, you guys should always read those things in the context of Fuse. I have reviewed those things in the past, so I'm comfortable with it. Now, we don't need to select anything except from the core component. It says upgrade because it's already installed on my computer from that other episode, but I wanted to show you the process, so we're going to go about and install it. My password on this demo computer is super shitty. Yours should be much more complicated and long. Okay, cool. So now that this is done, if we say we have a file, right, and we deleted a file and we want to restore it, you select the archive that you believe the file is in, and then you can hit mount. Now the next step here is a little strange at first, but what's happening here is when you mount file systems on macOS, by hand, you need to create a folder, or you need to give it a folder in which to mount. So we're going to select desktop and we're going to create a new folder and we're going to call it Borg and then open it. And what's happening here is it's going to use Fuse to mount the remote file system using Borg onto that specific path. So if we open this here, that looks like files that you have on your computer. So we're all used to this, and I can actually go about looking at the file. But when I'm looking at the file, what is actually happening here is very interesting. What's happening is those files are temporarily downloaded from the archive, decrypted, and I can then view them. All of this is done in a transparent way that is like magic, essentially. So if that file is what I was looking for, I can then take it and drag and drop it on my folder or wherever. And once I'm done with this, I can click here and say unmount, and it will unmount it. And then inside of the Borg folder, as you'll see, it's just empty. So this is really magic. This allows us to create backups that are super efficient using deduplication. It makes sure that those backups are encrypted and compressed on our computer before ever leaving the computer and going to the internet. And in this specific case, we're using Borg Base. It's a really nice cloud provider that specializes in Borg backups and actually has a kind of freemium model where the first 10 gigabytes are free forever. Again, I'm not sure how many can afford to do that, but hell, it's something that's pretty cool. So that's it for today's episode. I just showed you guys how to set up really robust backups that are actually encrypted on your computer. And in next episode, we're going to go one level deeper into the rabbit hole, and we're going to set things up without using Vorta, using command line. We're going to enable that append only mode, which adds one layer of security to the stack. And we're going to send those files to rsync.net. rsync is a cloud provider that's kind of like more for the enterprise side of things. They have an infrastructure based on ZFS. It's a file system that is extremely resilient to data, like to disk failure. So essentially when talking to Manu, who is the CEO of Borg Base, he mentioned that he uses RAIDs to make sure that data is protected. If my memory is correct, the way that things are set up, 2 hard drives per cluster can fail, and after that, data is lost. In the context of ZFS, and that's what rsync.net uses, I think way more than that can fail. I'll actually try to get the CEO of rsync.net. I'll try to call him and include that call and have him explain how ZFS works. So yeah, that will be the next episode in this mini series on cloud backup. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.